I speak to you in the name of the risen one. Maybe it is just me, but in some ways, Easter feels like it happened a long time ago. There's always so much prep, and then it happens, and it's wonderful and joyful. We hear the breathtaking good news, and we all yell, "He is risen," like our lives depend on it. And now, what? Because if we're honest, life doesn't seem that different this week than last. We know that life is supposed to have changed, but we still have the grocery shopping to do, the house to clean, and bills to pay. We still look at a world that is in pain, fearful, and wounded. In this week after, I'm guessing for most of us, life still has at least as many anxieties as alleluias. The gospel writers actually don't linger too long around the lilies either. Mark is in such an almighty hurry to get us out the door and evangelizing that he simply ends with the empty tomb. Matthew and Mark throw in a couple of heartwarming stories about Jesus appearing to his disciples, but Jesus doesn't usually hang out very long, often disappearing just as soon as they figure out who he is. But John lingers for a good while. He is the only one who has stories about the week after. The story we just heard, doubting Thomas. At least that's the complaint filed against him. He who wouldn't believe until he saw. The plain truth, though, is that none of them had believed until they saw. Peter and the beloved disciple didn't believe Mary Magdalene until they hoofed it to the tomb and saw that it was empty. And the rest had the benefit of seeing him when he dropped by the upper room, shiny and fresh from the tomb, the evening of the first day of the week. Since Jesus' arrest and trial, the disciples, with the exception of the women who had stayed by his side through the whole horrifying day, had been locked in that room having a collective panic attack. Partly out of all they had experienced, and partly out of fear for themselves. You probably know what panic attacks feel like. Your heart races, your palms get sweaty, you're unable to catch your breath. And without breath, as we know, life cannot go on. No breath, no way forward, no life. Before Jesus came to them that evening, their fear and anxiety had the disciples all knotted up, bound, unable to catch their breath. And then he appeared, breathed on them, and their fear dissolved into joy. As always, Jesus knew exactly what they needed, and this time it was breath. In an echo of what God did in the beginning, he breathed life back into them, his life. And while we don't know exactly where Thomas was when all this was going on, we do know that he wasn't there. He wasn't there when Jesus showed them his wounds and breathed the Spirit onto them, bringing them back to life. So when Thomas came back on the scene and heard this mind-boggling story that his companions told, Thomas had questions. All he had to go on was hearsay, no evidence. And I can't help but wonder if Thomas's trust issue was more with his fellow disciples, that he couldn't trust their story rather than he couldn't trust Jesus. Because Thomas had been through the whole thing with Jesus and the others. He had heard the sermons, had seen the healings, chowed down with the 5,000, heard Peter declare Jesus to be the Christ, and witnessed the horror of Jesus' death. He was as thrown as all of them when Mary came back from the cemetery and said she had seen Jesus. He was there for all of it, and he knew and he trusted Jesus until he wasn't there. And so he needed proof and was tagged for eternity as the difficult one in the crowd. But I think Thomas actually got it in a way the others didn't. Listen to what he actually says. "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in and my hand in his side, I will not believe." He wants to see the wounds and not the face. He wants to see Jesus' hands and feet, the places where Jesus was hurt, even the place where the spear went into his side after he was dead. So what if the issue isn't whether or not Jesus was actually raised from the dead? What if the issue for Thomas was not that he had really come back from everything he had been through? What if it was that Thomas wanted to see proof that Jesus had not come back divorced from everything that had happened? What if he needs to see that the risen one is the one who died, not all magically healed and looking as if nothing had happened, but who has returned to his friends with visible evidence that he will never leave what is most human about him behind? If that's what's going on here, then Thomas is not looking for physical proof of the resurrection, but existential proof that the one whom God raised is the same one who was beaten beyond repair. That God did not do some sort of switcheroo and send a spirit or a ghost who had never lived in the flesh. What if he's looking for evidence that the Messiah knows all too well about pain, anxiety, and breathlessness, and will never discount or dismiss it? The more I think about it, the more that makes sense. Otherwise, we are to believe that Jesus' new life in God is a complete and total break with his old, nothing retained from his humanness. We are to believe that faith means seeing wounds of all sorts as an illusion, not to be taken seriously. Thomas knew at the core of his being that that sort of new life was not what Jesus promised or offered. He wanted to see the wounds. Only then could he believe that it all had mattered, the whole lot of it, the joy, the friendship, the eating, the crying, the grieving, the wounding, the pain, and the death. Only then could he believe that Jesus' resurrected life meant something for every life, no matter how wounded, scarred, or scared. And once he had seen the wounds, Thomas proclaimed loudly and forcefully, "My Lord and my God." And just like that, he was not missing any more. He was back. Late, yes, but back. And you will notice that Jesus did not seem to mind coming back just for Thomas alone, a special appearance for Thomas's sake. So like Thomas, may we know, we who are still here after many, many years, after countless weeks after, we who share Jesus' scars and wounds and anxieties and fears, may we breathe deeply, and may we hear Jesus' blessing for us. Blessed are you, the wounded and the scarred. Blessed are you who have not seen and yet have come to believe. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. May it be so.